Aren't we?
Started, yeah. Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're now in week 10 of our Survive and Thrive webinar series, which we've been running throughout lockdown in collaboration with Gatwick Diamond Business. My name's Daisy and I'm the Community Manager at Sussex Innovation Centre in Falmer. And I'm joined today by my colleague Anne-Fay, who's our Insight and Market Research Advisor, HR consultant Monica, who's the founder of Inside Advantage, and Claire, who's the Managing Director at Scaramanga, which is a creative and marketing agency. So just a couple of housekeeping bits before we get started. We'd love to get your input today. So if you want to share your experiences, any lessons that you've learned during this period, please put those in the chat section. If you've got any specific questions for the panel, then please put these in the Q&A. And a little tip, just make sure that you've got your settings so that any comments go to all attendees and panelists as well, not just panelists, so everyone can see. So the theme this week is lessons learned from the great homeworking experiment. And it's an experiment that not many of us actually volunteered to be part of, but we have been part of it for the past few months and continue to be. So just to get started, I'm going to pass over to you, Anne-Fay. As our head of Insight and Research, what observations, what learnings have you picked up over this period, kind of through research and anecdotally as well?
Well, hello everybody, first of all. I think what I've noticed that I've actually found really nice, but obviously has both challenges and opportunities, is that we've all suddenly gained a real intimacy with each other that we weren't really expecting to have. We've been colleagues and working in a formal environment of the office, a professional environment, an adult, mainly adult environment, and now we're suddenly all kind of in each other's bedrooms and sheds and wardrobes and outhouses and offices, and I think that's a kind of interesting genie that might not necessarily get back in its bottle. I think it's created a new intimacy between colleagues and between clients and suppliers that I think is really nice. I think what's really constructive about it is it's shown a lot of us the realities of family life, the realities of people's household lives. I think where there are challenges is I think as we continue to move through this great home working experiment, what can we do as colleagues and as clients and as suppliers and the various other dynamics that we have in the working world to show sensitivity and empathy towards the situation that we find ourselves in. So for example, I've seen a few instances of a bit of Zoom shaming where people kind of remark on other people's bedrooms, or maybe don't think about the impact, or think about more about what the impact is of what you're saying. Not all of us have the luxury of a spare room. Not all of us, a lot of us live in shared houses. It's about kind of being more attuned to the implications of this sudden intimacy that we have. I'm also very hopeful that we'll emerge from this with a better understanding of what it is to live and work. I think it's been really great for me seeing people's kids photo bomb and Zoom bomb various meetings. And she may well make an appearance now. I've stopped banning my children from coming into my workspace because I've actually realized that work has invaded their space rather than the other way around. And I don't want their memories of this time to be me behind a locked door. I think that could potentially be, and this is just my feeling, I think that could be really, that's the thing that I think could be really damaging for them, is discovering parts of their house is somewhere that they can't go. And that is really challenging to handle. You might get a live demonstration of it at some point today. But I think yeah, I'm really hopeful about some of the things that will come out of this. I mean that's very much my kind of personal observations. I think as a kind of in a formal research context, I think what's very, very interesting about this is I think we're starting to see the implications of the technology that we're using. So there's a lot of people talking about Zoom fatigue. There's a lot of people talking about, there's a lovely turn of phrase that a medical doctor and associate professor at INSEAD has coined called Zoombies. of this syndrome of like kind of like just being absolutely exhausted by constant Zoom calls, and the kind of the audiovisual aspect of Zoom, I think, is really challenging. And we've kind of presumed that it will just replicate meetings, and it doesn't. And I think we need to start to think about the flex and give that we can have around Zoom. So I've started switching video off a lot, and that's really helped. I have this headset that means that I can walk around. That's massively helped. And these are things that I actually nicked from my partner, because he's worked in this way for years. And he very early on just stopped using video conferencing as video conferencing and has always used it just as telephones. I think broadly what we need to think about is how this home working experiment has, I think, in some ways negatively impacted some groups of society more than others. So there's been quite a lot of editorial about how women and girls in particular have been overall negatively impacted by the crisis, but particularly in the work context, because women tend to be caregivers, tend to be the main parent, tend to do the housework. And this is not to say across the board that this is happening, but a UN report recently noticed that unpaid care work has increased, with children out of school, heightened care needs of older persons, and overwhelmed health services. And they found in their research that that's overwhelmingly negatively impacted women more than men. So I think that's something else that we need to think about going forward, is how do we start to improve that situation?
Yeah, because it's going to be an ongoing situation if the schools are now not going to be going back till September as well.
Yeah. And I think particularly the care scenarios of households where there are older members of the family, you know, that is not scenarios where lockdown is not going to end anytime soon for those households, because older people will still be very much classed as extremely vulnerable. So I worry, I think, in that context for those households, because for a lot of us, as the lockdown eases, there's not necessarily an end in sight for a lot of other households, and we need to be very mindful of that, and employers need to be very mindful of that.
So Monica, I mean, what do you think will change going forwards, and what won't?
I'd like to think that employers will look at what's happened over the past period of time and recognise that they can move to a more agile working practices. But the rate of adoption over previous years has been so incredibly slow. We have to wait and see what actually employers take up. But there are bigger employers that are moving that way and have, issued notifications to staff to let them know that probably for the next 12 to 18 months, they're going to be working at home. Bigger employers have probably got the measurement systems and structures in place to support that. My concern is the smaller employers are the ones that really need to have that, mind shift, and they're the ones that may struggle because of the reasons that they don't adopt flexible working are, as I said, the measurement, they fear a loss of control. So there are a few things that business owners need to address internally in their own businesses. And as an HR consultant going into businesses on a regular basis, I see the challenge of collecting real measurement data that informs business practice and business performance. And to have an agile workforce, you really need to have that up and running. So that, I think, is one of the things that is going to cause a problem, because it's something that we've tried to encourage businesses to do for years, and the rate of measuring the key business metrics along with your people metrics is still a very, very, very slow thing to get up and running.
And in terms of kind of looking after employees working remotely, kind of where does the pastoral care kind of come in for employers? What should
that is the big one. That is the big one. And because we've all been working from home, those of us who can for some period of time, I'd like to think that employers are quite well versed in this now and have been taking the steps to do that, because what employers need to appreciate is, as much as people are working from home, that it's not just, oh, they're working from home, they're in the middle of a pandemic trying to work. It's a completely different situation. And employers need to be mindful of that. So when they're looking at performance and all of the things that you typically measure staff on when they come into the office, they need to, the things that Anne-Fay has just said, absolutely, fundamental. There's people working at home with children. They've got their own anxieties about the pandemic. There's people working at home with vulnerable people. their level of performance may well be affected, but that shouldn't deter employers from looking at potentially moving to agile working, because they need to take into account the other factors that have hindered or that individuals have had to deal with while they're trying to keep on top of work. But the benefits of it is, if you can't do things at certain times of day, you know, you've got 24 hours to do it. So some people will use time when, you know, I'm a carer for my mother, as an example. So I will do everything around my mum. It won't be the standard 9 to 5, but if you add the hours up that I do, it will be considerably more than I would probably have done if I'd have gone into the office and then come home at the end of the day. So they really need to understand what it is they want, what the, you know, the considerations are, and how it will benefit the business and not just their staff.
And how do you think a business's culture could kind of either help or hinder with the adoption of?
Yeah, I've touched on that. I think trust is the fundamental thing when you're looking to move to agile working. If you don't have the trust in your staff, then you're just not even going to consider it. I've been fortunate enough to have staff that initially, when I started my business, we did work from home. We then moved into an office because I felt that I needed to come out of the home for a bit because of all the things that we've just, you know, talked about, being in the home, having the responsibilities, not feeling like you're getting out and having that interaction. And I felt I needed that. So it was my decision to move into the office and bring the team in. And since moving back to working from home, because we'd done it before, it was very easy to do. Productivity was maintained. And I'm absolutely telling you, I have had so many more hours out of my team during this lockdown than I ever would have done in the office, because I've had emails at ridiculous times of night, not expecting them to be there the next morning, and then they're there the next morning. And it isn't because of me asking them to do that, because I put no pressure on them at all, because they know the culture of our business, but it's what they do because they've got the trust from me in them, and I've, you know, given them that leeway to do things their way when they're at home, as long as they get the objectives done. And that takes you again back to measuring your performance. So, you know, working from home relieves, it helps individuals in so many ways, and stress is a real area that it helps. Individuals working from home feel considerably less stressed than they do going out to the office every day. I can say that even though my job has been extremely busy and I'm working at home with a vulnerable person, my mother that I'm looking after, I felt the reduction in stress just from not having to run around in and out of the office, various meetings, doing everything from one location really helped me personally. So there's lots of benefits to the individual, and employers need to look at that as well.
I mean, the commute is one thing. People are getting kind of hours back from the day, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I start work. Something that I really struggled with, think may disagree, is I actually found the first 2 weeks, and I'm used to working from home because I worked from home for years, but I've actually found that the first 2 weeks I was almost too productive because I was working too much. I was forgetting to do things like take breaks. I wasn't taking lunch, and also because I was able to start work really early, because there wasn't that kind of commute, and then you kind of get into work and you have a cup of coffee, you have a chat and all that kind of stuff, which I really like and I think is really important. I was just getting straight into work and just working through the whole day, just flat out. And then I was just like, kind of, I don't think I want to continue working like this. It's just too much. It's not good for me. So I think it's almost like, I think also employers need to put a break on so look at some of their behaviors and think about, you know, is this causing more stress? So that's one thought. But also, you know, is my scrutiny causing more stress, for example? But also, like, kind of, how many hours are my employees actually working? And are they, you know, are people taking lunch breaks? Are people going for a walk? Are they having that flex in their day that normally the structure of office life would actually enforce, and working from home doesn't? So I think it's actually the opposite attitude, is like, don't presume that your staff are slacking off, actually presume the other, that actually they might be working too much, and that you need to put some boundaries, you know, give them some ways of actually taking some time back. Yeah,
100% agree. And that comes with the, you know, the relationship, the trust, you trusting your staff to do it when they need to do it and not putting the pressure on them. You will get that extra. And I think they will naturally know when you have that relationship that they can do those things. But it's really interesting what you said, because I found exactly the same since I've come back to working from home from the office. When I went into the office, I was very, very good at eating at set times, taking a break, getting up, going for a walk. Since I've come back home, I've reverted right back to exactly what you described.
Same thing. I just motored through and I had to catch myself and stop. We've actually got some questions coming through as well, Daisy. We've got some questions in the Q&A. We've got some questions in the chat. So should we, before they disappear into the...
Yeah.
Because they go really quickly. Oh my goodness.
There's lots of questions, which is great. So to start...
You want to start with the chat?
Yeah, start with the chat. So this is one. Are people, employers and employees, taking their health, fitness and wellbeing more seriously as a result of the lockdown?
I think so, definitely. Yes, we've put some measures in place to help with wellbeing for our team, which we probably wouldn't have considered before. Yeah, we're doing some, we've run an 8-week course on mindfulness and meditation for the team. It was open to everyone, not everyone chose to take part. But that's probably something we'd have never considered before. And I think everyone who did take part, myself included, has found that's been a really good way of reducing anxiety. So yeah, I think, we told a client of ours, and they did something similar as well for their team, which has gone down extremely well. So yeah, I think you know, as I said, you know, a lot of us have personal anxieties around this crisis as well as business anxieties. I'm asthmatic, and you know, the thought of getting the virus has really caused me a lot of anxiety and concern and things like that. So I think it's not just the home working. I think there's all of the general anxiety and stress around the whole situation for ourselves and for the people we love.
Yeah. I mean, we've been giving lots of communications to employees working from home and touching on things like doing mindfulness. You know, one of the things that some employees have is they don't really have the space to work from home in the traditional way. You know, they may be sitting on their bed all day, which is really not good for them at all, or having to work in their bedroom or in really tight spaces. So it's really important for employers to share tips with them as to how they can kind of, you know, break the association between work and the bedroom, because that would be a really bad association to develop. And, you know, encouraging them to set those boundaries that we all have admitted on here that we find so hard to do, but employers need to take that on board as a real responsibility to encourage their staff, as Anne-Fay said earlier, to take the breaks, to take the walk, to finish at a certain time. And to do that, they need to communicate that to the business as a whole and all of the stakeholders, you know, their clients and individuals who are going to communicate with their staff. Because there's one thing that the employer's saying, oh, don't worry about that. But if you're being bombarded by queries from clients at certain times, a tendency to respond to that will be there, which will increase the anxiety even more. So employers need to think about making sure the boundaries for giving their staff the space that they need, whether we're in the middle of a pandemic or not, to make sure they have a good work-life balance.
Can I just quickly pick up on Lauren's question as well, because Lauren has said that as working full-time, leading a charity and a team of staff which is responding to the pandemic, plus homeschooling 3 children who will not be going to school until September. This is not something that I've seen the government acknowledge very much, but I am seeing increasing amounts of editorial about it. And it's one of the reasons why we wanted to run this webinar, is I think the disproportionate impact on caregivers of this crisis, and the presumption that there does seem to be a level of presumption that we're all keeping calm and carrying on. And I think there is a recognition coming through in the press that this is disproportionately affecting women. It's disproportionately affecting caregivers who happen to be women. And we need to start to look at what that load will be. As a follow-up to the webinar, Daisy and I can share some of the materials that we use to base this on, and certainly writers such as the Guardian columnist Suzanne Moore has written about this. The UN report, I think, is very, very useful because it's based on hard data that this is an issue. So those stories are emerging, and it has been noticed and it is being picked up. It does need to be amplified. I think the government does need to do something specifically about it, because it is a real challenge. And I think I have a bit of a filter bubble, obviously, but I think the Guardian in particular has done some really good work around this issue in highlighting the disproportionate impact on women in particular. to do with the household environment, and how there is a particular stress there that needs to be acknowledged. And as you point out, Lauren, this is if small children are involved, it is definitely in homes. It is until September. We're in this unless something changes radically. We're in this until September, and that needs to be acknowledged. And I think for Monica and for Claire, there's a question of I think employees and managers and people who work in business who are in this situation have managed this far, and quite bluntly, I think and I'm in this category too personally. We've coped this far. Honestly, how much longer am I going to be able to cope? I'm not really sure, and I'm developing really good strategies. But I think it's employers and the government need support on that. And I think I'm very fortunate. I've had a very supportive employer, a very supportive boss, but there needs to be some flex there, doesn't there, to help people get through it. And furloughing is not the flex that I think any of us want. Quite the opposite.
Furloughs are going to be very challenging as well. I mean, obviously for people, particularly women with young children at the moment, they're homeschooling. Mine's 15, so he's doing a lot of his own study, but I'm going to be faced in the summer holidays with how do I keep him, interested, engaged when he hasn't got schoolwork to do and he wants to go and see his friends. So I think the problem is just going to change, but it's still going to be very much there for 6 months.
And I think almost like the government had a kind of, when I saw at the beginning of the crisis, there was an interview where an HR consultant, not Monica, was interviewed, I think, by the BBC, with someone who had precisely this problem. She's like, I now have to work from home. I have children. I just can't see how I'm the main caregiver, that I'm the one they come to. So, obviously she was talking about a household of 2 adults, but she was because she was the main parent, the children gravitated to her. And she was saying, I don't know how I'm going to cope. And the HR consultant response was like, you need to ask to be furloughed. And I think that's such problematic advice, because I want to work and I need to be working. And I don't want to be in a situation where it's okay for me to be furloughed as an answer to that particular quandary. So I think as we work through this crisis, we need to find better solutions to that quandary.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm just going to go back to the chat here. We've got a question.
But also Tammy says there's a lot of people forgetting to eat or drink. Yeah, I think we almost have to. I've started booking out lunch in my diary.
To start with, I had the opposite problem, but I was like,
raving.
This is when I was still in the living room.
it can be an issue, but I mean, one just a personal strategy that I found that works is kind of works. I missed lunch yesterday because I forgot about it. Sometimes works. Is I've started booking lunch as a meeting and saying to people in my diary, don't book over it, I'm having lunch. And I'm putting those, and we'll talk a bit more, but putting boundaries in place for you, because you have to, because work has entered your house and your home life. I think there's a need for us to start pushing back and establishing those boundaries. And that is a really privileged situation to be in. I think I'm probably able to to be in that situation because I have a direct line to my boss. I work for a relatively small company. Bigger organizations, I don't know how this will work, but people will start falling over. They'll start falling over because of the anxiety of this situation, people's personal anxiety, and then work anxiety on top of that. It's just not sustainable.
Yeah, I've got a question coming that came in. This kind of goes back to productivity from working from home surveys. Would you say that people have found themselves to be more productive and motivated, or more bored / disinterested?
Particularly during the pandemic, we haven't got the figures, we haven't seen that, but generally productivity is higher, much higher when you work from home. We've seen research that puts it as high as 30%, sometimes 40%, but it's always above 10. And that is because of the commitment. It fosters commitment, and, employers want to please you because you've given them something. You're being reasonable with them. It's that reciprocal relationship that we have with our staff and with our managers. And that's where the trust and the building of that relationship is absolutely fundamental to setting up an agile working strategy. So, yeah.
Sorry, Claire.
I think we found that it's a bit of a mixed flag. There is, you know, I think under normal circumstances, we do find there's a big increase in productivity when working from home, particularly when you can switch off the phone and switch off emails and really focus on something. But we have found a bit during this lockdown that there are waves when we find that certain team members, their energy levels just dip. And, you know, we're having to look to sort of try and get them back up and back, you know, energized and enthused and everything. And I think that, you know, we've got some team members who are working out of bedrooms, which, you know, it's not ideal circumstances. So I think I totally agree with Monica for normal home working, but I think in the lockdown we're certainly seeing that, you know, there are some energy levels that do need to be, you know, supporting people on and helping them get back up.
And that's a really key point for any employer thinking about moving to agile working. To do that, you need to know the performance level that can be achieved in your business, what your staff are actually achieving in a normal situation. And when you're looking at the past 3 to 4 months, you cannot really use that as any kind of benchmark to measure your staff's performance. So if you're thinking about 4 to 6 months time and looking back over the year's performance for a member of staff, it has to be adjusted to take into account the anxiety levels that people are feeling and have been feeling working from home. Even if they're not working from home and they've been going into work, they're doing it under completely different circumstances. So there's going to be that anxiety there all the time. And I found that, you know, I've absolutely found what Claire has described, where there are days where I'm finding it really hard to motivate myself because there's so much going on, and you have to filter what you see, what you watch, what you take in, because it can have such a profound effect on you. But there are other days where you jump out of bed and you're absolutely raring to go. So employers need to appreciate that during this time it will absolutely flux, and they need to adjust that when they look back.
But I think also we need to look at people's bandwidth. I think, you know, we've talked a little bit about scrutiny, and I think we need to start, and we should have done this before the crisis, but, you know, if you're setting up a meeting via Zoom, thinking about, does this actually need to be a meeting, or could this be a phone call? Or if it's not a phone call, could it just be a Slack message? I mean, it's really interesting. I found that Slack in particular has really come into its own for me during this crisis, because it enables you to work, and we've had a few questions in the Q&A about time management, and particularly trying to do things around small children and working from home in the household and all the dynamics and things that go on in the house. And again, my partner's been working in this way for 6 years now, and he very early on adopted this mode of asynchronous working, where he will work, and he works with colleagues who are on the other side of the world. So he has a time difference as well. So he literally cannot talk to people all the time during the day. But I think that's actually helped him, because he works in an asynchronous way via Slack mainly, where he will just talk to people and share documents, and they will get to it when they're ready. And his business ebbs and flows in that way. And if they need to be together and talk, they'll call each other on the phone. But mainly they work in an asynchronous fashion using Slack, probably a bit of email, and they work around their own, and they all have, you know, they all have families, they have children, and they work around those other dynamics in their lives. And it's not perfect, but it's a lot better than I think what a lot of us are trying to do at the moment, which is replicate office life in the 9 to 5 in the household. And I think that is already really challenging, but it's going to become more and more challenging if we don't realize that what we've done is we've left an office-based environment and moved into an asynchronous environment. And we need to start using the tools and the technology that we can have, but also a stepping back as human beings and saying, does this need to be a meeting? Do I really need to have a meeting about this? Or could I just call somebody up?
Yeah,
I'm starting to be really brutal. So I've moved a lot of my team communication entirely over to Slack, and that means I don't have a mountain of emails anymore. So I don't have that stress anymore. And Slack, I find that I'm more in control of, particularly because I turn notifications off, so it doesn't ping at me, and I just dip in every now and then and pick things up. So I feel more in control, and that's really helped me.
And you can call people from Slack as well.
And you can call people from Slack, which is brilliant. I'm not sure my teams agree. I found that what I've had to do with Slack, again, it's kind of gaining empathy, because I used to just call people, and then I realized that that's probably actually quite problematic, particularly people for whom I manage, because it seems like I'm checking in on them. So what I've started doing on Slack is just dropping them a message saying, is it okay for a quick call? Let me know when works for you. because I don't want to be that over-the-shoulder manager. And I'm not that over-the-shoulder manager, but I have to think about how I come across using these tools.
There's two really important things that you've touched on there. One is the tendency for some businesses during this, and this goes back to the fear and control that I touched on earlier, which is prohibitive to, you know, progressing to an agile working practice, is the Zoom calls. Employees try and find the balance between well-being, engagement, and they need to think about how that looks to their staff. So I've had employees who have had to attend Zoom calls literally every morning and every afternoon. And they're like, I don't even speak to these people this often when we're in the office. So all of a sudden I'm faced with having to sit and speak to my manager and the, you know, other people twice a day. And that is the manager's issue. You know, the manager somehow, I think, feels that to see their staff at the beginning of the day and the end of the day gives them some comfort and knowledge that they're working. It doesn't.
But there's a real impact on this, and also they're not working because they're in the meeting with you, right?
Exactly.
They're not working because you're taking up all their time.
Exactly.
But also I think there's increasing evidence that Zoom, because of how it works as technology, is innately draining. So, for example, there's a lag on Zoom, and also just using your visual sense as well as your audio sense through the medium of technology is just inherently tiring. We really need to start thinking about this stuff, because I think it's really starting to have a real negative impact on people. I had a friend who said to me the other day she had 7 Zoom calls in one day. It's just, you know, you wouldn't have 7 meetings in a day, would you? Maybe you would. Well, I don't know. That's not
had 2 days. I had 2 days of assisting a client with redundancy meetings, which had to all be held on Zoom. So I had 10 each day for 2 consecutive days, and that was exhausting. And again, I think a lot of them didn't really want it. They're happy to have the conversation by telephone, but you know, that's the demands that the client wanted. It's
really interesting. I've started like trying to read, and again, I think I'm coming from a place of relative privilege, because I have, you know, I have existing client relationships, and also a team that I've worked with for a while. But I've started trying to like really ring fence it. So like kind of just turning the camera off, or in one instance just saying it was broken, actually. A white lie, but a useful one.
I think we've still got some more questions, but maybe we'll pass over to Claire for a bit to kind of talk about the things from an employer's perspective, and then come back to some more questions after that. Maybe, like, firstly, if you could just tell us a little bit about the company and kind of how things looked pre-COVID.
Yeah, so we're a marketing and creative agency. There are 9 of us in the team, so I've always worked in marketing, and I founded Scaramanga in 2000, and worked very closely with a web and design agency called Thoughtful for many years, and we merged with them last summer. So we now have 2 offices, the Caterham one and also Kings Hill, and you know, that's helped us really, I think, because we had to set things up to work a little bit remotely with us being on 2 sites. And the kind of things we do with marketing, advertising, social media marketing, graphic design, branding, websites, the kind of things you'd expect from a marketing agency.
And so you obviously had the 2 offices, but did anyone from either office work from home prior to this?
It wasn't encouraged, certainly. Very occasionally, you know, if you had to do something that required shutting down the phone lines, shutting down the emails, and just getting your head down and working on it, that was fine. And if, you know, somebody had a delivery coming, then they could work from home. But it wasn't normal practice by any means. No, but I mean, what helped us with moving to when the lockdown started was our Kent office is based on an old RAF base from World War II, and there have been a few unexploded bombs found during building work that's been done, and there was one in November, and the whole building had to be evacuated for about 2 days, which was a challenge as we had some deadlines on. I had a very, very stressed client because we couldn't complete stuff all the time. So that actually made us put a business continuity plan in place, which again, we would have never done, I think, under normal circumstances. But yeah, so that helped us, you know, thanks to that bomb, when the lockdown did start, we were actually ready and had our plans in place to move quite quickly. And we use systems like, you know, we use SharePoint for file sharing, and we've got a system called Zoho, which is project management, CRM, HR. It's got a channel called Click, which works very similar to Slack. So we fortunately had a lot of those systems in place.
And quite a lucky position in a way.
Thanks for that.
And how you've obviously talked about the ways that you've kind of helped and supported staff with their well-being over this time. How have you kind of managed people's performance whilst they've been working remotely?
So we've been doing some one-to-ones. We have a culture anyway of doing, a lot of peer review of work. So we're continuing to do all of that. As part of our Zoho thing, because what we're selling is our time fundamentally. We've always had timesheets that need to be filled in on different projects. So that's been one way that we've been able to check what people have been doing and what time they've been spending. Trying very hard not to do that in a heavy-handed way, sort of light touch of it. There's been some people where it's like, we're pretty sure you did more than 1 hour on Monday. Can you fill that in, please, for us? So we've been doing that kind of thing, and daily calls, just short, quick catch-up calls to talk about, ongoing work and projects. Hopefully not too onerous, Monica. Hopefully we've not been overwhelming people with those calls, but they seem to be quite effective, and it's a good way to catch up and touch base with someone on a personal level as well. And we've got a junior web developer working with us, so the web team review her code at the end of every day to make sure that she's on the right track. So so those sort of kind of measures that we've been putting in place. Not perfect, but it seems to be mostly working.
Working for you, that's good.
We've moved during this. It was a planned migration anyway, but we've moved over to SharePoint, and it's actually been massively beneficial because what we've been doing is using SharePoint in some cases rather than having a meeting. So because you can jointly edit things, you're actually having a meeting in the document, if that doesn't sound too weird. And you can see that if you are a manager that needs to see that people are working, you can see that people are working because they're in the sheet doing the work. And so it actually kind of enables scrutiny, but also it's become a very, very useful work tool. I would say almost like revelatory, to be honest, because we've been able to work together as a team in a way that we're not used to, but that has been forced by the situation, but that we found that most of us can actually just do because it's relatively straightforward. Although having said that, I've actually got a thing that I'm working on at the moment that I can't work out how to upload to SharePoint, but
in theory,
really good. With all Microsoft products, it's a great concept, but sometimes the execution is a bit iffy.
But I think the wider point is, and it's really interesting because we've had members of the team that migrate to Slack naturally. We've got members of the team, I can see that Nigel's on the call, who use SharePoint really easily and really intuitively and seem to have none of these challenges. So I think you have to be ready for different competencies and find ways of untangling them and enabling people to put their hand up and say, I need help, before they just say, oh, sod this, stop using it.
I had to have an hour's phone call with somebody the other day in a company that I work with, where there were so many platforms to use. I wasn't on half of them. And I was sitting and thinking, well, why do we use this one? And what's this one for? So I think employers really need to think about which one works for the business. Because if you've got 4 or 5, your staff can be spending there literally for a couple of hours each day, catching up on what's on there and what's on there. So what do you need? What's the purpose of it? And does it address the things that you want it to?
What the purpose of it is really, really important, because I think you kind of you can go, I've got this great new tool, and everyone goes, amazing. But you kind of need to decide what it's for. And I found something that's really, really interesting about this is I think there are differences depending on where people are at in their life stage. So really, really broadly speaking, I find that for a lot of our team who are in their first job, they get Slack like that, because a lot of them are of the instant messaging generation, WhatsApp, the Gen Z, millennial, just intuitively work in that way, and intuitively work, I think, sometimes asynchronously, but also within that very I'll just use technology to just fire off this. And then you've got other people in the business who for whom email has always been the work tool. It's always been the thing that you use. But maybe what this situation made me realize is what do I actually use email for? And what can I move off email and put on other channels? because it doesn't need to be on email. And what I started doing is actually kind of like stuff that's really like kind of hefty and serious that maybe I would have written a letter for in the 19th century is actually what email's for. It's to get really important missives down, and everything else is just ping, ping, ping.
That makes sense.
I'm going to go back to some of the questions that we've got from
I think Nigel has a question, which I think is for Monica and for Claire. When you talk about productivity when working from home, are you talking hours or output? I hope Nigel doesn't mind me reading this out. I think this is the useful way of doing it. I'm doing extra hours, but everything takes longer.
I think it's a balance between the two. I mean, obviously, at the end of the day, output is the important thing, the quality of it and getting through everything. You know, I think it's also a point to sort of make clear with the team that just because they're working from home and there's no sort of scrutiny on what they're doing, you know, they might have said, oh, I'm going to do such and such a task today, it'll take me all day, and they do it in half a day. That's not an excuse to then slack off for the rest of the day, I would say. It's then looking at, well, okay, what else can I do with that time? So I think it is a balance between the two.
I would definitely lean to output. You know, staff should be measured on their output, and home working and agile working definitely lends itself more to the knowledge economy and knowledge work. Knowledge work is one that is very hard to measure based on the number of hours that are put in. So it's what are the objectives of the role and what do they need to deliver, and are they delivering that? And if you've got somebody in the office who's sitting in front of you, you don't know what they're doing. You don't go over and look at their screen just to check what they're looking at, or you don't know, you know, they're just there. So the comfort that employers get from somebody just being there, they need to understand as well when they're in the office what their output is in exactly the same way as they do when they're at home. So all of these questions that are being asked now should be being asked when the person sitting in front of them in the office.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of, what do you do if you didn't have all that kind of that knowledge before all this happened? You haven't really got anything to compare it to.
So what it will do is, as I touched on earlier, one of the things that anybody in HR and employment law will see is that the lack of recorded measurement performance data. And if this encourages business to start looking at that and doing that, then it will benefit the relationship and it will benefit the business performance and output, because you'll really have a handle on what your staff are there to achieve. You'll be able to cost it. You'll be able to forecast better. It will have real benefits to the business, as well as all the benefits we've spoken about that it has to an individual. So there's some good practices that will come out if employers are really prepared to sort of dip their toes into something they've been previously afraid of doing.
But also, I think, you know, this situation is going to create a radical shift, I think, which is needed about our expectations around the 9 to 5 and what it's actually there for. So are we employing people 9 to 5 for those hours so that they sit and do a job, or are we is it a transaction that's about the value that they bring, and we're not necessarily and this is controversial thought, but actually that's just about how they do it. What matters is the output rather than the productivity, if that makes sense. I was really lucky, and my first job was for a kind of probably too cool for school advertising agency. And my first day, they just kind of said, probably lethally, we don't actually mind what hours you work. We want you to do the work. So what we'll judge you by is your output, and then the rest is up to you, which is a very liberating and very dangerous thing to say to somebody who was probably 23 at the time. But underlying that was, we trust you to do your job. But there was also a very important message that said, you better be bloody good, you know? Because all you're going to be judged on is your output rather than your presenteeism.
Yeah. And that level of trust not only improves performance, but it improves quality of work, because you don't want to let your employer down because of that relationship that you have. So when you have that reciprocal trust, the quality of work goes up as well as the output.
Yeah, and ironically, I actually did more hours because I felt freer, and I ultimately spent more time in the office and more time working. So I'd work on that job. I worked on on holidays. I remember writing a proposal on New Year's Day from a hotel in Amsterdam, and never questioning why I was doing that. But it's because they'd performed a little bit of a mind trick with me. They said, we trust you and you are free. But actually the counter to that was, and you'll be working all the time. But that's where we are now, is that, we're in a situation where we're if possible, we can work all the time. So, because we found that we can in this as knowledge workers. So I think some of the other things that would be really useful to talk about is how do managers and employers, but also employees, start to boundary time and productivity in a way that, people are still doing a great job, but also feel that they can say no, or not at the weekend, or not at 7 o'clock in the evening, or because I think there's a lot of fear, isn't there, as well, at the moment. There's understandably, there's a lot of fear, and I think we all feel that at certain levels. So how can employees and managers empower employees to say, I'm not doing that, or I can't do that? Is there a better way of saying that?
Everyone is essentially at home, so even when you're on holiday, everyone knows that you're not. Yeah,
you're not on holiday. So you're not on holiday, are you?
You'd still be available potentially. Yeah. It's hard, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really important though to set those boundaries, and I think I touched on it earlier about the communication that needs to go along with moving to this way of working, where not only do the staff know what is acceptable, how you'd like it to be, what the freedoms are, what the leeways are, and then stick to that. So don't say, oh, it's okay, it's fine, and then bombard them with 10 emails the next day for something that you want, because you're just confusing the message, and they're not really you're not going to get the benefits out of it. So it's about making sure that the staff know exactly what your expectations are, and that they do have some leeway as long as the outputs are delivered. And it's also, as I said earlier, about communicating to the stakeholders, the clients, the contacts, everybody that interacts with those individuals, so that they know there is going to be a change in the business model. We're still going to deliver, we're still going to do everything we did before, but it's just going to work in a slightly different way. So be prepared for responses maybe to take a little bit longer, but the deadlines and everything will be met. So it's all about communicating what you're doing, why you're doing it, and that everybody who's involved and has an influence on that comes along with you. Otherwise it won't work.
Managing expectations, managing clients' expectations, as well as your team's expectation. And we've just done that to one client who would bombard with emails all day, every day, and it just became impossible to manage the work properly. So we've pushed back and agreed a framework of which days we're going to work on their project and how we're going to do it, and we've set up systems for managing that. And if you can do that with clients, you can do that with staff as well.
I think that's really important, is that I don't think you can complain, sadly, I don't think you can complain about a client's behaviour if you enable it, or a manager's behaviour if you enable it. I mean, obviously the dynamic is very different if you're a junior member of staff and it's a senior person, but then that's the job of the seniority of the business to manage that. But it's a really interesting case in point. People always talk about Martin Sorrell, obviously, who used to run WPP, who was famous for sending staff all over the world various BlackBerry messages at 3 in the morning, and everyone was expected to respond to them. But my feeling about that behaviour is nobody actually said to him, my member of staff is not going to respond to you. No, because he was the head of the company. He was completely enabled in that behaviour because you were told, because I was one of the recipients of these bloody emails. And you were just told you had to do it. So he just continued to behave in that way. And I think unless boundaries and pushbacks are enabled, then kind of that slightly bullying, abusive behaviour will happen, won't it?
Yeah. And for those boundaries and pushbacks to work and to have the effect that you need to then have the business case to demonstrate why that behaviour is unnecessary. Because if that person who's doing that feels they need to have that interaction, that level of control at the various times, they don't trust the outputs that's happening in their business is typically the reason behind that behavior. So get the business case, get the stats, get the information, show what's happening, show the outputs, get the client satisfaction feedback, all of the things that you can say, look, you don't need to do that, look at how the business is performing, and actually you're compromising this performance from your behavior. Just saying, oh, don't do that, they won't be so keen not to, to change their behavior unless they have the hard facts in front of them as to why it's no longer necessary.
We're having some more comments coming from the staff about R&R, which I think is a really important point, because as Daisy said, how can you go on holiday when you can't go on holiday? And I've been thinking about this quite a lot at the moment, and I think this all falls under the kind of like pressures on household, work invading the home space, over productivity, people working all the time, people not remembering to take lunch, and what does holiday look like in our current context? And I do think there is a really, really important opportunity for businesses to say, do you know what? And I don't know what this look like, and Nigel might not support this as our CEO. But it's like kind of, is there an opportunity? And we had at the start of the crisis, Nigel very kindly gave us the afternoon off, and it was that breath of fresh air, just like kind of okay. And I think it's wondering about what are those space to breathe times can you give your employees and give people that you work with, to just kind of like go and just not work for a bit and just to take a breather, because the reality is that none of us are going on holiday for a while, are we? And I think a lot of us are in situations and household scenarios where there is no let up. And I think I don't know what your thoughts are, Monica and Claire and Daisy, about kind of like what the opportunities are, other than angling for another afternoon off. Badly. But I think what was really helpful about that is the acknowledgement, like kind of, my God, this is grueling. And what are the opportunities to reach out to staff and give them that breathing space?
And it's small
without
steps
affecting
like
productivity.
And it's small steps like that make a huge difference, and I was familiar with that, and I thought it was a great way of appreciating what staff had been going through, the commitment that they continue to show, and just giving that little to them, which, as you've just outlined, it made a huge difference. So it's that recognition and appreciation that needs to be maintained all the way through to keep them going and to keep them motivated.
Yeah, because somebody in the chat has just said that they have mixed advice on whether you can make employees take leave or only encourage. And I think there's two challenges here, aren't there? Because people need to take their leave, but understandably at the moment they don't want to, because they don't really feel like it's leave. So those have business and commercial implications, but also at the same time, people do need to have a breather. So I don't know if it's some kind of like happy or potentially unhappy medium for employers.
My advice to employers, first of all, legally, you can ask your employees to take leave. There has been some debate in the legal circles between employment barristers and solicitors about whether it actually applies during this period, and can you do the same for staff on furlough? But when the government announced the scheme, they said normal employment law continues to apply, and the only thing that they have actually changed is the ability for staff to be able to carry their annual leave forward for 2 annual leave years after this. But I think holiday now is as important as when the individual's in the office. Even though you cannot fly away somewhere, you need to take that step back at times. So if your member of staff isn't taking holiday, number one, you could be thinking about it from their well-being perspective, but number two, you have to manage your business and how you're going to perform and how you're going to come out of this as the lockdown is continually eased. And if you've suddenly got 10 members of staff all suddenly with 50, 60 days annual leave, and then they can go on holiday, you're going to have some challenges. So my advice to clients is ask staff to reduce their holiday, ask them to take holiday at a certain time so it reduces their level, but don't do it with all of it, only do it with a small proportion, so that when more measures are released and they can do more things, they still have some holiday. They're going to get more holiday next year. I don't think because of this, they're suddenly going to need to go away for 8 weeks next year as opposed to the 2 that they normally do. So it's just about considering what they need now and what they'll need in the future, but also balancing that against what the business needs to do.
But I think also as businesses, we don't necessarily barter, well, maybe we shouldn't, but we don't necessarily barter with the benefits that we can give people. So I think, you know, the only kind of really similar experience that a lot of us have in our working memory of what's happening at the moment is the 2008 financial crash. And I thought there were some interesting examples of kind of agile working environments during that time. So I know, for example, one company that I worked for basically said to us prior to it getting really bad, you know, we obviously can't give everyone a pay rise at all this year, but what we can do is we can give you a bit more holiday. So, you know, not necessarily a massive impact on the bottom line of the business, but made people feel like, okay, so I'm not getting more money, but I'm getting more time, and I'm all right with that.
Which shows that even though we can't do what we'd ideally want to do and what you may want us to do, we recognise what you have done and want to give you something. So as I said earlier, those little steps are really important. And just to add to seeing a bit of conversation in the chat, just to add to the holiday, to clarify, you can do it under the working time regulations, but if you do ask staff to take leave, you must give twice as much notice as the number of days that you want them to take. And it doesn't need to be in your contract. It's good to have something like that in your contract, and it's easier to enforce where they take holiday at certain times, but you wouldn't have anything about a pandemic in your contract anyway, so you'd need to revert to the working time regulations. So as long as it's twice as much notice as the days you want them to take, 10 days notice for 5 days holiday as an example, absolutely fine.
And I saw someone made a comment, Monica, about the carrying the leave forward for 2 years. My understanding is that applied to everyone, not just frontline workers. Is that correct? Everybody, yeah.
I think we might have time for one more question, which we possibly sort of touched on already in the Q&A here. What about the loss of social aspects of work if people are working from home now, and kind of a breakdown of team morale? So I think it is that kind of that interaction in the office that people are starting to miss now. I've started going back into work a day a week now, and it was so nice to see some faces in real life
and not hug them.
That was sort of hard.
Really, yeah, it is really hard seeing people and not hugging them. It's like, ooh. But I think social ways of maintaining social interaction, I think, is really key. I've just started just calling people. It's been really nice just calling people.
Just for a chat
on the phone, and also just for a chat, because I think that's the other thing that we've fallen into is like kind of everyone is so time pressured and there is so much work that it's very easy to make work all about work, and in the office work is not all about work.
There's a couple of things that I'd like to say on this. There's a bit of a split with age that we have to look at, because your more older generation are not going to be used to chatting on Instagram, WhatsApp and whatever, but the younger generation, I mean, they can sit in the same office and that's how they'll communicate, or sit in the same room and that's how they'll communicate. So it's not going to affect that generation as much. I think the older generation that is not so, you know, tech savvy and used to all of these things, they're the ones that will probably feel that more. But that's why a blended approach would work very well, I think, coming out of this recovery, where, yes, there's circumstances where people need to be allowed to continue to work from home for various reasons, but because of the social distancing, because of the way offices are changing, you can have it where they maybe just pop in 1 or 2 days a week. They maintain that social connection if they feel that that's, you know, they are actually missing that. But also they have the opportunity to fit in everything else that's going on in their lives in the other days of the week, and giving them the option to do that and say, do it if it works for you, but if it doesn't work for you, continue to work from home, is a great way to go. And I know that Nigel's done that, so it's a really, really good approach.
I think that is pretty much all we've got time for. Thank you so much to our panel. Obviously, as I've mentioned, we're kind of starting slowly to return to our offices at Sync, which has been great. If any attendees here, if you're perhaps thinking about returning to work and maybe looking for bigger space so that you can kind of comply with social distancing, getting your teams back into the office, or looking to downsize, looking for co-working that's maybe flexible and closer to home, so you don't have to do the commute, take public transport. We've got a centre in East Croydon and one in Falmer. So I'm going to share a link with you to an inquiry form. So please fill that out if you would like to find out a bit more about what space we've got available and kind of our different support services that we have. Am I going to be able to share the link?
Well, also, because we'll follow up with a mailer to everybody as well, because there's been some requests for the articles that we've cited and the research that we cited, so we'll follow up with that as well.
Yeah, and we're going to be back here again next week for another webinar, same time. And the theme will be is innovation for survival. So that's going to be led by our colleague Simon. So hopefully we'll see you there. Right. Thanks everyone.
Thank you. Enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.